build religious hatred and intolerance, and promote the Canadian values of pluralism, respect for diversity abroad.
The Honourable, I apologize for interrupting the Honourable Member, but he will have 5 minutes remaining in his remarks when we resume the debate after question period. Statements by members, déclaration de députés.
The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. Mr. Speaker, on March 30th, we will be celebrating the 100th anniversary of the first Stanley Cup in the history of the Montreal Canadiens. And I want to take this opportunity to express all of the admiration that I have for the history of this great team that has marked Quebec's history since its liberation. 100 years ago, Francophones were very much oppressed politically and economically, and now that is still the case, but in a different form. The team enabled Francophones to have a team to represent them, and many Canadians have been able to move ahead because they've shown their talents and they've created a great legend. There have been 24 Stanley Cups go to the Montreal Canadiens, and Quebecers have this team for their own. The Honourable Member for Madawaska, Restigouche. Mr. Speaker, today is the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. This is an evil that affects many Canadians still. The UN recently looked at contemporary forms of racism. I want to highlight the initiative taken recently by law professor Michel Doucette and all those that signed his letter that was sent to the CBC that denounced the comments that were hateful and anti-Francophone and aimed at New Brunswick Acadians that were sent anonymously to the public broadcaster's website. A number of mayors and senators in my riding also supported the letter. The CBC has announced that it will no longer accept anonymous comments on its site, and we applaud that new policy. This week, colleagues, we need to work together to fight racism and intolerance in all its forms.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, spring officially arrived yesterday, and yes, I have seen my first robin of the year. Along with spring come some very important celebrations. In 2 weeks, on April 2nd, I will once again have the privilege of serving at the Elmira Maple Syrup Festival. This is the world's largest one-day maple syrup festival. The thousands of pancakes flooded with fresh maple syrup is something you don't want to miss, Mr. Speaker. In fact, if you will join me in Kitchener-Conestoga on April 2nd, I will be happy to serve you personally and any one of my colleagues in the House. Not only is the festival filled with good food, sugar bush tours, pancake flipping contests, and many other activities for all ages, the money raised from the festival goes to support local service groups who provide help and hope to those who are in a tough spot. And speaking of hope, Mr. Speaker, this coming weekend is Easter. The message of reconciliation, redemption, and hope is seen powerfully in the story of Good Friday and Easter. To you and all my colleagues, I wish you a happy and hope-filled Easter. Thank you, Mr.
The Honourable Member for London North Centre.
Mr. Speaker, today I am pleased to stand and recognize Greek Independence Day, which takes place March 25th. Canada is home to more than 250,000 Canadians of Greek heritage. As the son of Greek immigrants, I am extremely proud to call myself a member of this vibrant community. In 1821, after more than 400 years of foreign occupation, the Greek people fought back and won their liberty. Of course, there have been challenges since. World War II and a Nazi occupation, a brutal civil war, and a divisive period of military rule. But all of this was overcome. The economic downturn that Greece has experienced since 2008 will also be overcome. Greece is a resilient country and home to a resilient people. The Greeks use the word zito, or long live, and so today I say zito Elas, zito Kanadas. Ευχαριστώ πολύ, κύριε Πρόεδρε. And before you say it's all Greek to me, this simply means thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Algoma, Manitoulin, Kapuskasing.
Mr. Speaker, despite all the progress that Canada has made, we still have a lot of work to do to fight racism in all its forms. In addition to being cruel and unfair, racism has negative impacts on our social, psychological, and economic lives.
Decisions in society that affect individuals, communities, and the country as a whole. Racism creates barriers, limits participation, reduces productivity, and makes us all the poorer. In Canada, systemic racism towards Indigenous peoples is a sad part of our heritage that cannot be seen as anything other than shameful. As we mark the 140th anniversary of the Indian Act, the current climate of optimism must be tempered with an equal dose of reality. Only a true nation-to-nation dialogue will be the foundation of any solutions that address historic wrongdoings. In this House, we have a special role to play. As representatives of our communities and regions, we must always challenge ourselves to recognize discrimination and racism in its many forms and do our utmost to combat it through our work, words, and actions.
The honourable member for Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to highlight some of the great work happening in Brampton South at Sheridan College. I had the opportunity to tour the Davis campus, Center of Advanced Manufacturing and Design Technologies, the Center of Healthy Communities, and the ERIC clinic a few weeks ago. My favorite part was learning more about how 3D printing technology can be applied to the healthcare field. I want to thank the staff at Sheridan College, especially Dr. Regani, Mr. Banmurgi, and Dr. Javetsky for arranging the tour. The innovative work that is taking place at Sheridan College will make Canadians healthier and smarter. I'm very proud of our government's innovation agenda led by the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development and the Minister of Science. Together, we are making real change happen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, whether it's the Hart Memorial and Art Ross Trophy winner Joe Thornton, Olympic gold medalist Dave Bulsey, Vancouver Canuck Bo Horvat, or Olympic curling coach my Uncle Jim Waite, Elgin, Middlesex, London has some of the finest Canadian athletes. Today, I would like to celebrate one of the best in the world. Currently holding 1 world record and 7 Canadian records, Gordie Michie is making waves in the pool. The son of Gordon and Linda Michie, Gordie started swimming at the age of 14 and shortly after decided he wanted to enter into competitive swimming. He joined the Jumbo Jets in his hometown of St. Thomas, led by coach Penny Bosma. Trying to keep up with Gordie's accomplishments is a real feat with hundreds of medals, trophies, and ribbons. His most recent accomplishment was at the 2015 Toronto Parapan Games, where he won gold, silver, and 2 bronze. This April, Gordie will be diving into the pool to reach his Olympic dreams. Starting April 5th, Gordie will be competing for the Olympic trials to represent Canada in Rio. Gordie, on behalf of the constituents of Elgin, Middlesex, London, and all Canadians, we wish you the best on your road to Rio. Bring home the gold.
The honourable member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges. Mr. Speaker, spring has officially arrived in Vaudreuil-Soulanges. We have many festivals and activities in our communities to mark this time. Last weekend, I had the honour to take part in the 7th annual St. Patrick's Day celebrations with young people and older people became Irish for the day.
Bird, the Irishman of the Year, Derek Johnson, our parade queen, Shannon Pine, and her princesses, Olivia O'Keefe and Maria Isabella Misseroni. The opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to sport a green beard, wearing a green bow tie, or delighting in some of the great local Irish fairs are just some of the reasons that the citizens of my riding look forward to this activity every year. The event is so popular that the quaint and historic town of Hudson jumps from a population of 5,000 to over 10,000 for the day. I would like to thank the members of the organizing committee, Jim Beauchamp, Gary McCohen, Mike Clayman, and Ken Duran, as well as all the volunteers who worked tirelessly to make it happen. Cheers.
The honourable member for Scarborough-Guildwood.
Mr. Speaker, I was saddened by the news of the attack at the Canadian Armed Forces Recruitment Centre in the member for Willowdale's riding on March the 14th. I think I speak for all members of this House when I say that we are proud of the way our CAF members showed bravery in the face of such a threat. This is what we've come to expect from our men and women in our military. Senseless violence has no place in our society. It is because of the work of our members of the armed forces that we enjoy peace, security, and freedom in Canada. We stand with the Canadian forces today and every day, and with a hope for a speedy recovery, for those injured in this senseless act of violence.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, it has been more than 7 months since the 4 children of Alison Azar, formerly of St. Albert, were kidnapped by their father and taken to Kurdistan. They are in an area of escalating violence. With a spring offensive taking place as we speak, there is urgency for action, and I call on the government to use diplomatic and all means necessary. I also, Mr. Speaker, encourage all honourable members to join Alison after question period at a candlelight vigil in front of the Centennial Flame. Mr. Speaker, let us stand united in solidarity for the safe return of these 4 Canadian children.
The honourable member for Sackville, Preston, Chesapeake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, on March 20th, we celebrated International Francophonie Day. It was an opportunity to celebrate our linguistic diversity and to appreciate the extent to which Acadian and Francophone language and culture are strong in our history. This is something that brings Francophones together around the world. The Right Honourable Michael Jean, the General Secretary of the Francophonie, said we need to seize this opportunity to make our common language a language of resistance and give our words all of their power. I would also call on Francophones around the world who might be thinking of immigrating to Canada to consider coming to minority regions like Nova Scotia. In order to protect the vitality of our language and culture, it is essential that we fully include all new Canadians. Thank you.
The honourable member for Scarborough Rouge Park.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. While we have made great strides in advancing racial equality, we must recognize that much work lies ahead as we strive to eradicate racism in Canada and around the world. Today, I want to highlight the systemic failures of our criminal justice system towards racialized groups, particularly our youth. The numbers are shocking and speak for themselves. 25.4% of federal inmates are now Indigenous men and women. 36% of women in federal prisons are Indigenous. The justice system failed over 1,200 missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and their families. Young black men are more likely to be stopped by police in major urban centers. Our justice system is rooted in the rule of law and the protection of charter rights. These are important values cherished by all Canadians. Our system of justice is said to be blind, but for many marginalized, racialized groups, this reality is different. Mr. Speaker, I ask my colleagues to recommit our efforts to eradicate racism everywhere and most urgently within our criminal justice system.
The honourable member for Beauport-Côte-de-Beaupré, Île d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Mr. Speaker, I would like to highlight the fact that yesterday, March 20th, was the International Francophonie Day. Since Samuel de Champlain founded Quebec City in 1608, language and culture have been part of our DNA in Canada from sea to sea, and French has been part of that. Today, over 10 million Canadian Francophones have taken their place, and the international Francophone community has helped them to express their pride and hope around the world. Francophone culture is alive and well in Canada as well as elsewhere, and it is something that promotes economic development and innovation. I am glad that Francophones around the world and across the country have come together to celebrate International Francophonie Day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
honourable member for Willowdale. The honourable member for Willowdale. No.
Mr. Speaker, it was originally my intention to stand in the House today to recognize Nowruz, the first day of the vernal equinox, which is celebrated by more than 300 million people around the world. I plan to congratulate, in particular, Iranian Canadians on the start of a new year filled with new possibilities for a community that contributes so thoroughly to Canada. Instead, however, I rise today to acknowledge the unsettling events that unfolded in my riding last week when an assailant approached the Armed Forces Recruiting Detachment in Willowdale and injured 2 members of our armed forces. I am happy to report that both Canadian Armed Forces members have fully recovered. However, the incident, as emphasized by the member from Scarborough-Gilwood, once again serves to remind us of the sacrifices our brave men and women in uniform make every day. I would also like to acknowledge the Toronto Police Services, and in particular, members of 32 Division, headquartered in Willowdale, for their much-needed cooperation.
The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, I am sad to tell you that I learned last year that the J'ai faim à tous les jours Foundation's head would be retiring. This is an organization that helps people that don't have enough to eat. The founders, Serge Allaire and Monique Couture, will be retiring. The foundation was created 16 years ago and helps children get meals at school, and that helps them concentrate on their education. I took part in an activity on Saturday to celebrate the founders. I want to say, too, that there will be people taking over because the torch will be passed to another organization, but I want to highlight the passion and dedication of Serge Allaire and Monique Couture on my behalf and on behalf of my constituents. Thank you.
For Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Mr. Speaker, 56 years ago today, a peaceful protest in apartheid South Africa ended in violence. 69 people were brutally killed for simply demanding the right to move about freely in their own country. 6 years later, the UN declared March 21st the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. 50 years ago, the international community loudly proclaimed that such racial violence and discrimination was inexcusable. Today, that same message needs to be heard around the world. While many people now live free of discrimination based on the color of their skin or their background, we should remember that many challenges remain. For world leaders that have not completely rejected these ideologies, we hope that this day serves as an incentive to do better, to acknowledge their wrongdoing, reverse their approach, and reconcile their differences with those who have been wronged. On this Day of Unity, we urge the Government of Canada to continue promoting Canada's compassion and tolerance globally so that all people have the opportunity to live freely.
The honourable member for Mississauga, Erin Mills.
Today, on International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, let us remember that our skin color may reflect the many shades of humanity, but our hearts all beat the same. I'm a young brown Muslim woman. My family is an immigrant family. I've faced the challenges, pain, and anger that racism can lead to. I came to Canada in '98 and struggled in this foreign land. Canadians opened their arms, and soon our house became our home. The neighborhood, our community, this land, our nation. Today, I stand as the member for Mississauga, Erin Mills, and I am proud. Canadians embrace diversity. In the words of our Prime Minister, we are strong not in spite of our differences, but because of them. We've come a long way, but still we have a long way to go. Let's strive to combat racism in all of its forms and keep Canada the land of equal opportunity the world knows it to be. Thank you.
Questions orales, oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we know at least three things in tomorrow's budget. The Liberals plan to borrow a lot of money. The Liberals have no real plan to create the jobs we need today. And the Liberals will have to raise taxes because borrowed money has to be paid back. And we know, Mr. Speaker, with previous track records, when Liberals spend a lot of money, it usually leads to waste and mismanagement. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister confirm that because of his mismanagement, Canadians will be stuck with his bills, and not just us, but our kids and our grandkids?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
In last year's election campaign, Canadians had an opportunity to listen to the various perspectives that political parties put forward and the plans for the future of this country. And we put forward a plan that focused on investing in our communities, helping the middle class, and creating growth in a way that would help all Canadians. And that's exactly what we campaigned on. That's exactly what we're going to be delivering in tomorrow's budget. We are comfortable with the fact that Canadians know that we need investment and growth because for 10 years they simply didn't get that from the previous government.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister knows full well that we had the best growth record in the G7. Tomorrow is shaping up to be a very expensive day for Canadians. When it comes to spending other people's money, the Liberals just can't help themselves. They're borrowing billions of dollars. They have no plan to pay back this money other than raising taxes, and across the country, hardworking Canadians and families are losing their jobs. Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister think it's fair that the average Canadian is digging deeper and deeper in their pockets to pay his bills?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians understand that we have the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. There are lower and the low interest rates.
Order. I hope we can all hold our applause until the Prime Minister finishes his answer.
Record low levels of interest rates right now mean that this is an opportunity to invest in our future. Confident, optimistic economies are willing to invest in their future, in their children's future. For 10 years, the previous government did nothing but shave away and cut instead of investing in the kind of tomorrow that Canadians need. This is the budget that Canadians have been asking for through the last election campaign. This is what we're delivering to grow the economy and help the middle class.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the truth is business investment has dropped off the cliff since they've been elected. That's right. And Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have broken every economic promise they made. They have no credibility left. During the election campaign, they promised that they'd only run a modest $10 billion deficit. Will the Prime Minister confirm and acknowledge that because of his mismanagement, Canadians will be stuck with his bills that are out of control? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, during the election campaign, we put forward a plan to invest in our communities to help the middle class and create economic growth. That's exactly what the business community and economists internationally and domestically have said that the Canadian government should do. So we are aligned not only with Canadians, but also with experts who say that this is the right time to invest in our future, not the time to cut in services offered to Canadians. That's what's going to create economic growth, and that's what we're going to deliver tomorrow. Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, last week, the Parliamentary Budget Officer announced that our Conservative government had balanced the budget. Allow me to quote Mr. Fréchette. Mr. Fréchette said, "We continue to predict a surplus of $1.2 billion for 2015-2016. That's our official position. The budget was balanced." We found out this morning that 69% of Canadians are worried about their financial safety. What does the Prime Minister say to the billions of Canadians who are worried about this Liberal spending spree? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. One thing we saw during the election campaign last fall is that indeed Canadians were worried about their economic future. And despite the positioning and the promises and the so-called economic action plan of the former government, Canadians were truly worried about their future, and that's why they chose a government that would invest in their communities, that would help the middle class, that would create the growth that has not been there for Canadians in the past 10 years because of the lack of leadership of the former Conservative government. Well, member for Lac-Saint-Jean, Mr. Speaker, when the Canadian public sees its taxes significantly increase, they'll understand what this government did. The forestry industry, among others, is going through a difficult period. We know there's important subjects such as the renewal of the agreement on softwood lumber, the loss of jobs. That's $20 billion for the Canadian economy. That was completely forgotten in the throne speech. We wonder what will be in the budget about the forestry industry. Can the Prime Minister tell all regions of the country that live from the forest what measures will be in his budget? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I'm very eager to table a budget that will address the concerns of Canadians throughout the country, including in the regions, in the forestry industry. We know the time has come to invest in innovation in our regions, in our natural resources, in order to create the growth and jobs that we haven't seen in the past 10 years under the former government. This is the time for us to turn the page on 10 missed years and invest in our future once again. That's what we're going to do for the forestry industry, for the regions, for all of Canada. Honourable member for Outremont. Mr. Speaker, we found out today that Bombardier intends to outsource another 200 good Canadian jobs abroad. That is in addition to the 2,400 families that lost Bombardier jobs last month. Our aeronautics industry needs help, but not to the detriment of workers and their families. Does the Prime Minister intend to protect good jobs here in any agreement to be signed with Bombardier? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Yes, Mr. Speaker. I thank my colleague for his question because it's a very important one. What we want, essentially, is to protect good jobs for Canadians in the aeronautics industry as well as in other industries. That's why we're taking the time necessary to assess Bombardier's proposals to make sure that if there are investments to be made, it will be in the short-term, medium-term, and long-term interests of the workers in the aeronautics industry throughout Canada. The Honourable Member for Outremont. The loss of jobs are being lost at Avro Canada as well. Workers need support. Fewer than 4 out of 10 who need employment insurance have access to it when they need it. The Liberals voted against our motion that sought to force them to meet their own promises about employment insurance. The budget is coming down tomorrow. Will the Prime Minister finally respect his own commitments about employment insurance, yes or no? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I said, we put forward in our platform concrete commitments to improve access to employment insurance throughout the country, including in regions that are going through a lot of difficulties because of the low price of oil. I can assure my honourable colleague that we will respect our election promises in the budget to be tabled tomorrow. I'm eager to see that.
Children across the country are living in crisis because the federal government doesn't provide them with the same resources other Canadian kids get. We have children in Saskatchewan suffering from horrible sores because they don't have access to clean, safe drinking water. We have children who desperately want to learn but are forced to attend school in third world conditions. Will the Liberal budget provide full equivalent funding to end the gap on health, water and education for First Nations children?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. It's an important one indeed, as we have put forward since the beginning of our coming into mandate as a government, renewing the relationship, building strong infrastructure and support in communities across the country, particularly in those most vulnerable communities for Indigenous children. These are things that we're making a priority, and tomorrow's budget will feature historic investments in First Nations and Indigenous Canadians Canadians right across the country to begin to make it right that we have not done for so many decades in this place, in this building.
The honourable member for Outremont.
Hazard's children were kidnapped. We're talking about 4 Canadian children taken to Kurdistan in the middle of a war zone. Today, I met with Alison here in Ottawa, and she's asking once again for the Canadian government to intervene and help bring her children home. The need for action is urgent, Mr. Speaker. Why hasn't the Prime Minister bothered to call President Barzani to bring these kids home?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are fully seized with the importance and urgency of this case. Canadian consular officials are working extremely closely with the appropriate government authorities in Canada and abroad, including law enforcement, to return the children safely to Canada. Consular officials are in regular contact with Ms. Azar as we pursue the safe return of her children. Rest assured that the safety of those children is a high priority for this government.
The honourable member for Milton.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are very concerned about massive deficits because, of course, they lead to increased taxes. And, in fact, polls today show that Canadians' concerns are economic in nature. First, jobs, and second, taxes. And that's what members on this side of the House have heard in the run-up to the budget that the government will be presenting tomorrow. So I'd like to know from the Finance Minister, when will he actually admit that in their campaign they misled Canadians and they said that the deficits were going to be moderate, but indeed they're not, and that these massive deficits of the Liberal government are nothing more than broken promises?
Honourable Secretary Parlementaire des Finances.
Parliamentary Secretary.
Canadians made a clear choice last October. They decided to have a fundamentally different approach to managing our economy. Mr. Speaker, our priority is growth, and that's exactly what we're going to deliver tomorrow in our budget. We're going to focus on the middle class. We're going to help Canadian families. We're going to create growth. That's what Canadians expect of us, Mr. Speaker, and that's exactly what we're going to deliver exactly tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Milton.
I fear, Mr. Speaker, that their approach is fundamentally different. That's to spend until there really is a recession.
Absolutely.
Mr. Speaker, the Boys and Girls Club of Canada hosted the Finance Minister for a photo op on Friday. Now, while I laud the location choice, it's a great organization, I am very concerned about the message that he may have left for these young kids. Now, the Prime Minister's best friend, Kathleen Wynne, has already saddled these kids with $22,000 for each of them in terms of a provincial debt. Can the Minister tell us whether or not he explained to these kids as well that his out-of-control borrowing is actually going to top up what Kathleen Wynne's government has already saddled these children with for long-term debt repayment?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to say that the Minister of Finance and I went from coast to coast to coast to listen to Canadians. We did that over the months. We were elected in October, Mr. Speaker. We heard from thousands of Canadians. Hundreds of thousands of Canadians have submitted IDs online. And, Mr. Speaker, as we approach this budget day tomorrow, we took all that into consideration, and we did make a budget, Mr. Speaker, that's going to work for Canadians, and for once, they know that this government is on the side of Canadian families.
The honourable member for Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow, the Finance Minister will officially plunge Canada into an extended period of massive borrowing. Already, TD Bank says the Liberals will put Canada into a deficit for at least 10 years, and experts across the board are increasingly warning that this year's $30 billion Liberal spending spree will not have any major impact on economic growth. We are not in a recession, and this budget won't deliver any major boost to the economy. Why exactly is the Finance Minister borrowing $30 billion?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my honourable member for his question. Mr. Speaker, when the economy is growing slowly, that's the time to invest. That's what the IMF said. That's what the World Bank, that's what most economists in this country have said, Mr. Speaker. At a time where interests are low, that's the time to invest in the economy. That's what Canadians expect of us, Mr. Speaker, and that's exactly what we're going to deliver tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, it's not just that the Liberals will break their fiscal promises this year. We're now told the real big-ticket spending won't start for for a couple of years. For the Liberals, a $30 billion deficit is just a starting point. Already, the finance minister is talking about raising taxes on small businesses, tech startups, and professionals. What other businesses will see their taxes go up in tomorrow's budget?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud. Thank you. I thank my honourable member for his question. Mr. Speaker, what we're going to present tomorrow is exactly a budget that's going to focus on the middle class, help Canadian families, and create growth in this country, Mr. Speaker. That's the choice that Canadians made on the 19th of October, a fundamentally different approach to running this economy. That's what most economists have said. That's what most international institutions. Mr. Speaker, this budget is a budget for Canadian family, for the middle class, and that's what we're going to deliver tomorrow.
The honourable member for Huron-Bruce.
Canadians are concerned. $1 billion of taxpayer money will still result in Bombardier shipping production to Mexico and China. There's a better solution that doesn't cost taxpayers a dime. A private Canadian company came forward with a major order for C-Series aircraft. They just need a little longer runway. When will the minister allow the expansion of the Toronto Island Airport and get Bombardier employees back to work?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We in this government are very proud of Canada's aerospace industry, and as I have repeatedly said, with respect to the question that my honourable colleague asked, we made the right decision, one of choosing a balance between commercial interests and the interests of the community, including the development of their waterfront. Thank you, sir.
Honourable member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, while the federal government is preparing to provide $1 billion in financial aid to Bombardier, Bombardier is preparing to send even more jobs abroad.
Subsidies are inefficient and a waste of taxpayers' money. When will the government understand that it is not fair to force small entrepreneurs to pay taxes to fund subsidies to a corporation like Bombardier?
Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, we understand the importance of the aerospace sector, the high-quality jobs that it employs, the contribution it makes to our national income, Mr. Speaker, and that is why we're engaged with Bombardier. We understand that this company employs people not only in Quebec, but Ontario and Manitoba and across the country. These are high-quality jobs, and we're going to make sure we work with the company to make sure that we have investments in R&D, that we have head office jobs here in Canada. It's about growing the economy, investing in the aerospace sector, and it's fighting for good quality jobs, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hochelaga. Mr. Speaker, a month ago, the community of Saskatchewan declared a state of emergency. 1 month later, nothing has happened. Many children have major infections all over their bodies. The photos of these children are troubling and shocking. How can we leave our children in such a situation? The problems with drinking water, mold, and housing are well known. We need more than a Band-Aid solution. What will the government do to finally solve this situation, which is unworthy of a country like this?
Mr. Speaker, Health Canada is fully aware of the concerns of the children in Saskatchewan First Nation. We have been involved in that community and will continue to do so. There are immediate steps that have been taken. A number of children have already been transported out of the community to get the medical attention they need. There is a medical team from Moose Factory who are going into the community to identify further cases by going door to door. There will be further steps taken to prevent further infections. We will address the public health needs in the community as well as the social determinants of health.
Honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It has been over a month since the communities of Treaty 9 declared a medical state of emergency, and this weekend Canadians saw that shocking face in the children of Saskatchewan. I want to thank the Indigenous Affairs Minister and the Health Minister for working with us on an emergency plan for the most severe cases, but they know the crisis is systemic. The mold, the lack of clean water, the need for a proper medical system. I'm asking the Minister, will she commit to a timeline and a plan so we can end this state of emergency and reassure these children that they can grow up in their communities healthy and hopeful and safe?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. As he is aware, Saskatchewan First Nation is among a number of communities in our country who are facing very serious gaps in their health outcomes. We are absolutely determined to address these gaps. I'm working with my colleagues in Health Canada to address not only the immediate health needs of a community like Saskatchewan and many other Indigenous communities across the country who are facing serious concerns. We are looking at how we can prevent these conditions. I am working with my colleague, the Minister of Indigenous Affairs and Northern Affairs, to address the underlying causes, and we will make sure that the health gaps have been addressed.
The honourable member for Portage Lisgar.
Well, Mr. Speaker, more delays from the Liberal government on job-creating infrastructure. This time it's liquefied natural gas in British Columbia that's getting roadblocks from the Liberal government. In fact, the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change doesn't even bat an eye at interfering with legislated timelines. Is this the type of political interference that the Liberals promised would happen at their cabinet table?
The Honourable Cabinet Secretary for Environment.
Mr. Speaker, as we promised during the election campaign, our decisions relating to environmental approvals will be based on science and data and Indigenous consultation. Our government is ensuring that environmental risks associated with resource development projects are addressed before projects are allowed to proceed. With respect to the PNW project, on March the 4th, the proponent submitted new information with respect to this project. The request from the agency for more time reflects the fact that we must do more assessment of potential effects on fish, marine animals, and human health. We recognize the importance of timely decisions, and once the proponent has provided the additional information, we will respond within 90 days.
The honourable member for Portage Lisgar.
Well, Mr. Speaker, just a reminder that LNG from BC going to Asia will reduce coal use in the southern Pacific. And, Mr. Speaker, it's good for the environment globally. It's good for the Canadian economy. So again, Mr. Speaker, we ask the Liberal government, why won't they stand up? Why will they always get in the way and not go to bat for LNG instead of throwing LNG under the bus? Mr. Speaker, truck drivers in BC, workers in BC are concerned. We're looking for this Liberal government. Workers in British Columbia are looking for this government to stand up for LNG in BC.
Yeah.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member also knows, the wood fibre project was actually approved on Friday because we had thoroughly assessed the science and the data and made the decision that it could move forward in an environmentally sustainable way. We are going to take the time with the Pacific Northwest project to ensure that we understand the science and the data before we make an appropriate decision.
Honourable member for Lakeland.
Last week, I met with natural resources developers in beautiful BC. The construction of the Kitimat LNG facility and the Pacific Northwest LNG project will create over 9,000 jobs and many opportunities for First Nations. 330 long-term local careers will sustain the PNW project. On behalf of the thousands of people who are counting on it, will the Liberals support job-creating LNG development, or will they hinder it with ongoing uncertainty and higher taxes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Environment.
Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House understand that the environment and the economy go hand in hand in the modern era. We are working through the process to ensure that the science and data associated with ensuring that good decisions are made are fed into the process. As we discussed, the wood fibre project was approved on Friday. We are taking the appropriate time to ensure that decisions are not based on politics, they're based on good science.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, people understandably doubt the Liberal position on Canadian energy. The Prime Minister hired anti-energy protesters like a senior advisor who said 2/3 of our fossil fuels should remain in the ground. The PM's right-hand man, Gerald Butts, wrongly believes Canada's natural resources can't be developed while reducing GHG emissions. How can Canadians trust the Liberals' support our responsible energy development when those at the top are so against it?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Speaker, as my honourable friend has said, there was a major project that was approved just last Friday in British Columbia, which was a decision of sustainability that understands that we will create these jobs while protecting the environment of British Columbia, as we will do with other major projects, Mr. Speaker. We think that we can now proudly say that we've done the right thing the right way, and we'll do it again.
The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker,
Workers are waiting far too long to simply know if they will be eligible for EI benefits or not. On average, they're waiting 39 days. And if they want to talk to someone at Service Canada, it's almost mission impossible. Losing a job is stressful enough as it is, without the government adding insult to injury with these never-ending delays. Unemployed workers don't have the luxury of waiting. Will the government make a decision to quickly hire people in order to reduce wait times?
Honourable Minister of Employment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is true that the employment insurance program in Canada needs modernizing and repair. Canadians are waiting too long, too difficult to collect the benefits that they actually pay for. It is time, and we're proud to say we are the government that will provide those changes to modernize the EI system.
The honourable member for Churchill-Kiewatanook-Askey.
Mr. Speaker, under previous Liberal and Conservative governments, thousands of new mothers were unfairly denied EI sickness benefits while on maternity leave. These mothers who became seriously ill were forced to turn to the courts, and the government has spent millions fighting them. During the election, the Liberals promised to drop the court case immediately, but 6 months have gone by and it's still ongoing. These women have been through enough already. When will the Liberals stand by their promise and drop this court case against these women?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the honourable member who raised the issue. We understand that the time for these kind of lawsuits are difficult, costly, and stressful for the women that are involved in those cases. Unfortunately, I'm unable to speak about the case because it's before the courts at this time. But I do look forward to resolving all outstanding issues that are before us.
The
Honourable Member for Shefford. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the recent announcement about the 150th anniversary of the Confederation of Canada in 2017, excitement around this great year of celebration is building. Can the Minister of Canadian Heritage give us in this House more information linked to the various themes and Vision for Canada 150? The Honourable Minister. I'd like to thank my colleague for his excellent question. 4 main themes will be behind our celebrations: youth, inclusion, and diversity, reconciliation with First Nations, and the environment. We have made several announcements last week in Halifax, Toronto, and Montreal, for example, in order to put forth structural projects that will leave us with a legacy and will be there for the benefit of future generations. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cypress Hills Grasslands.
Mr. Speaker, the Office of Religious Freedom was given a specific mandate, and it's been successful in carrying that out. It's been recognized internationally for its work and its leadership. This government has a choice. They can dilute the mandate and destroy the international work of the office, or they can enthusiastically support it and ensure its continued success. This small office has had a huge impact around the globe. Will the government commit to continuing the present mandate of the Office of Religious Freedom?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Human rights are universal, indivisible, and interdependent. They are interrelated and best defended and promoted together. As the Prime Minister has stated repeatedly, Canada's diversity is a source of strength, not weakness. So to expand on the initial good work of the office, Canada will explore the best way to situate freedom of religion within a broader human rights framework. Our goal is to build on and strengthen the good work of the office by including the protection of religious freedom as a fundamental component of a comprehensive vision of the promotion of human rights. Better is always possible.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, atheists in Canada are very concerned about the growing persecution of non-believers in Bangladesh, Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere. Religious freedom includes the right to not believe. While some atheists were initially skeptical about the Office of Religious Freedom, they are now represented on its external advisory board. Atheists remain skeptical, of course, but not about the work of this office. Will this government finally give atheists some hope for the future, some assurance of things yet unseen, and support our motion to renew the Office of Religious Freedom?
the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you. A sense of humor is a wonderful thing. There's hope. As a multicultural and multi-faith country, Canada is well placed to champion all human rights internationally. In fact, our own charter guarantees everyone the fundamental freedom of religion and of expression, association and assembly, which is precisely what the member opposite was getting to, and I thank him for his question.
I hope for order. The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, the United States, the European Union and the Vatican have characterized the barbaric actions of ISIS as genocide. But the Liberals refuse to use the term to describe the slaughter of Yazidis, of Christians, of Shia Muslims in territories ISIS controls. Now, is that because, Mr. Speaker, the government's watered-down so-called non-combat mission in Syria and Iraq can do nothing to stop genocide under terms of the UN Convention? It's a big word.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you. Canada strongly condemns the crimes perpetuated by the so-called Islamic State, including those committed against religious and ethnic minorities. But genocide is not a term to be used lightly, and Canada is a member of the International Criminal Court, which means the use of that term is different than it is for the United States, who is not. We are committed to preventing and halting genocide and crimes against humanity. We are committed to holding perpetrators of such serious international crimes to account. And our new, strong, 3-year anti-ISIL strategy seeks to address the ongoing crisis in Iraq and the destabilizing impacts on Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria.
I'm hoping we'll keep showing respect for each other and listen carefully and not interrupt. The
Honourable Member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, now I understand the explanation provided by my colleague opposite, but the European Parliament, the Pope, and now the Prime Minister's great friend, President Obama, have characterized ISIS terrorist activities against religious groups in Iraq and Syria as a genocide. Now the Minister of Foreign Affairs' response has been quite timid. Does the Prime Minister think that, like President Obama does, that this is indeed a genocide?
Carry.
I'd like to repeat that Canada is a member of the International Criminal Court. The term genocide there means much more than the term genocide in terms of halting genocide, and the opposition should know that. This is absolutely serious. This is not the United States of Canada, and our strategy.
Colleagues, we all know that each side gets to have their turn to speak, to ask questions, to answer questions, and let's let each take their time. Even if we don't like the answers or the questions sometimes, let's show respect for this place. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our anti-ISIL strategy, in fact, is an example of our strengthening conviction against the hideous crimes of ISIL, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Mr. Speaker, there is a national epidemic of drug overdoses, and the Minister of Health has acknowledged that safe injection sites like Insight in Vancouver make sense and save lives. Public health officials in Toronto and cities across Canada are asking for federal help to open these desperately needed facilities. Yet, Liberals are refusing to repeal Conservative legislation that blocks communities from providing harm reduction services. Will this government stop stalling, make an evidence-based decision, and repeal the Conservative C2?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, as my colleague well knows, we are a government who bases our decisions on evidence. In terms of the matter of problematic substance use, we will address this on the basis of public health concerns as well as a focus on harm reduction. And I am very pleased that communities across the country have recognized that our government is supportive of supervised consumption sites, which have been known to save lives, prevent infections, and help people to access the healthcare system in a safe way. We will continue to work with communities to make these sites more available.
Very good. The Honourable Member for Regina Louvain.
Mr. Speaker, concerns have been raised about millions in federal funding for Regina's global transportation hub. This Crown Corporation spent $21 million buying land at inflated prices from businessmen with cozy ties to the governing Sask party. 2 weeks ago, the Treasury Board president promised to look into this scandal. Even a former Sask party MLA has called for a police investigation. So, will the minister now report what he found, and will he be referring this matter to the RCMP?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Member for his question and also for his inquiry when I appeared before committee. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that the provincial government in Saskatchewan has actually engaged their Auditor General to look into this matter. It is a provincial matter. We look forward to the result of the Auditor General's inquiry on the provincial side. And the Honourable Member has played a role in provincial politics in Saskatchewan in the past. That's very good, but we would urge him to focus on his role as a Member of Parliament and the federal issues here that we are seized with today.
The Honourable Member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, it has come to light that the Minister of Justice actively opposed the Site C Dam project. The Minister worked closely with Treaty 8 First Nations to oppose it for years. Now with her role at the Cabinet table, how can we be assured that she will stay neutral? The Minister's mere presence will still have an influence. Will this Minister remove herself from the discussions on this project?
Wow. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the fall of 2014, the former government approved the project and set out a range of legally binding conditions with which the proponent must comply. BC Hydro must meet the requirements set out in the decision, and we're active in verifying compliance. We will continue to be proactive in that regard. We continue to reach out to Indigenous groups to ensure that they are consulted and that we understand the concerns that are being brought forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, Benjamin Bergen was the Executive Assistant to the current Minister of International Trade and her campaign manager. Now he has begun lobbying the Liberals. His relationship with this minister gives him access to her and her cabinet colleagues. He has even stated that he has an extensive network among senior public sector officials that will be a benefit to their organization. Mr. Speaker, what is the Prime Minister going to do about yet another insider getting special access to Liberal ministers?
The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, once again the members opposite are looking for stories where there are none. Ben Bergen worked for me in my constituency office and never worked for me in my ministerial capacity. I am absolutely confident that he will follow all ethical guidelines. I would like to add, however, that I am a strong supporter of Canadian innovators and entrepreneurs, particularly in the tech sector, and I am delighted to have met with them and will continue to support this crucial Indigenous Canadian industry.
Here, here. The Honourable Member for Barrie, Springwater, Oro-Medonte.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While people across this country were working hard this winter to balance their household budgets, our Prime Minister was in the Caribbean working hard on his tan. What's worse is that Canadian taxpayers are on the hook for $50,000 so the Prime Minister could enjoy his sunny ways. $50,000 is just the bill for the private jet to sit on the tarmac. So how much more will the Canadian taxpayers have to shell out for this Prime Minister's private Caribbean vacation?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, members of the Conservative Party know well there's a long-standing government policy for security reasons that Prime Ministers always use Royal Canadian Air Force aircraft for every purpose, including personal travel, as was the case with previous Prime Ministers. When travelling for personal reasons, the Prime Minister and members of his family reimburse an economy airfare. And, Mr. Speaker, they also know that standard procedure requires within 3 hours the Prime Minister to be able to return to Canada in case of a national emergency. That policy existed under previous governments, and we're respecting that same policy today.
The Honourable Member for Don Valley North.
With the CETA agreement started by the previous government stalled since September 2014, I was thrilled to learn that our government was able to get the talk back on track for signature and implementation next year. In 2008, Canadian goods and services export to the European Union totaled $52.2 billion. Can the Minister of International Trade tell the House what the impact of CETA will be for Canada and how it can benefit the Canadians through increased growth and prosperity.
The Honourable Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I was delighted last month to announce that the legal review of this gold-plated deal was finally complete and that we have successfully responded to Canadians' concerns about transparency and fairness in the investment chapter. I'm thrilled that this progressive deal is now moving ahead at full speed towards implementation next year. I'm also pleased that just this evening I'll have a chance to discuss the agreement with visiting members of the European Parliament's Trade Committee, a further sign of the new momentum behind CETA.
Honorable député de Portneuf.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Charcartier. Mr. Speaker, a former defeated Liberal candidate, Jocelyn Coulon, is now in the office of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Coulon stated in the past that NATO was amplifying the Russian threat in Ukraine and Europe just to increase military budgets of member nations. He even wrote, "Any argument is good to feed into this rearmament campaign, even the stupidest ones." Does the minister agree that the threat posed by Russia, among others to Ukraine, is just a pretext to increase NATO's military budgets?
Mr. Secretary for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you for the question. Canada stands steadfast with Ukraine. We always have, we always will, and we have been explicit in our condemnation of Russia's unlawful annexation of Crimea. The Russian interference and invasion of Ukrainian territory is completely unacceptable. We have one of the strongest sanctions in the world, strengthened further last week in order to apply economic pressure on Russia and the Putin government for its aggression. As the government of Ukraine has said, I believe Canada will be strong and firm in its pressure on Russia.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Mr. al-Abadi, a citizen of Iraq and former political prisoner of Saddam Hussein, managed to escape and became a government-sponsored refugee in 2002. He landed in Canada in 2007. 10 years after he fled, Saddam Hussein is no longer a threat. He traveled back to visit his family and to get married. In 2012, cessation provisions became law, and now the government wants to take away his permanent resident status. This law makes no sense. Will the minister repeal cessation provisions in Bill C-31?
Very good. Well, Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, there is some sense in these laws applied in certain ways, but on the whole, I would agree that this is part of the long legacy of things inherited from the previous government that must be reviewed and quite likely changed. So I have sympathy with the point expressed by the honourable member, and I can assure her that we will review these provisions with a view to improving them in the future.
The Honourable Member for St. John Rothsay.
Mr. Speaker, my home, St. John, New Brunswick, Canada's first incorporated city, established in 1783, deserves to have its story told and its place in our nation's proud history. Unfortunately, national historic monuments like Martello Tower, Fort Latour, Fort Howe, and Partridge Island are falling into ruin and have been ignored by previous governments. Projects like the restoration of Partridge Island would be transformative for my community by celebrating our past and promoting our future. What is the government's plan for reinvestment in our national parks and historic monuments?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to commend my colleague, the Honourable Member for St. John's Rothsay, for his advocacy on this important issue. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change was pleased to recently visit St. John, where she announced investments totaling more than $21 million in several Parks Canada sites across southern New Brunswick. This includes significant rehabilitation work on Carlton Martello Tower National Historic Site and major investments in Fundy National Park. Our government is creating jobs and taking action to ensure our treasured places are protected, celebrated, and preserved for future generations.
The Honourable Member for Grand Prairie Mackenzie.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Several groups have called on the Liberals to make special changes to help address specific labour challenges across this country. Last week, we learned that the Liberals were moving to help the fishing industry, but agriculture was left out in the cold. Surely, the Liberals understand that agriculture is an important industry in this country, contributing billions of dollars to our national economy each and every year. Now, I'm wondering if the Minister of Agriculture will stand up in this House and demonstrate a real commitment to help solving the labor challenges being faced by our farm families.
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to say that I had an opportunity to address a National Agricultural Agri-Food Conference in Winnipeg this past week, and we talked about a number of changes that are facing the agricultural sector, including very rapid industrial and innovation changes to equipment and the challenges of finding high-skilled operators. There are new advances in terms of training and skill development, and we're working very actively with the agricultural sector.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, in KPMG, in response to a question from my colleague on Thursday, March 10th, the Minister of Revenue stated, and I quote, the Canada Revenue Agency has not granted amnesty. My question is simple. Since there is no amnesty that's been granted, what are the penalties? How hard are the penalties being called for by the agency, and when will criminal charges be laid? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, there are not two types of rules. As I mentioned in the past, the agency has updated its strategy, has audited and taken legal action. The work of the agency is not completed. I would invite my colleagues to be cautious and to not jump to conclusions too quickly. The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, at the Paris conference, the government made a global commitment to fight climate change. But according to the Pembina Institute, putting the Energy East oil pipeline into service would result in greenhouse gas emissions going up by 32 million tons per year, and that's tantamount to adding 7 million new cars on the roads in Quebec. Will the government finally admit that the Energy East project is in blatant contradiction with the commitments made by the Prime Minister at the Paris conference?
The Honourable Mr. Secretary for Environment.
Mr. Speaker, again, this government understands that work on the environment and the economy go hand in hand. We have a plan with respect to climate change that involves a range of tools around carbon pricing, around mitigation measures across various sectors, and around a range of different measures that will allow us to meet the commitments that we made in Paris. We have never said that energy projects will stop. We have always said that this will be done in a broad and comprehensive way as we move through the next 40 years in a transition to a lower carbon economy. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, the Canadian homeless strategy is simply not working. The Prime Minister publicly went forward with the approach for homelessness to take action in Quebec by promising to increase the Quebec share by 250 million. Will the Prime Minister respect what he stated in Quebec, and will they help the people who are really in need? The Honourable Minister. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for that important question. This is a subject that is of great importance to us. As we pointed out, it's an issue that deals with people's vulnerability, the people who are most vulnerable in our society. The Honourable Member opposite will be surprised in the weeks to come when he sees the new relations that we have with the provinces on this very important issue.
This will conclude question period for today. Appel au règlement, l'honorable député de Raxan.
Mr. Speaker, to follow up on what was said by the Parliamentary Budget Officer last week, it is very important after all, and therefore I would like to table these documents to show that we have put our fiscal house in order.
Does
the Honourable Member have unanimous consent of the House? No, I don't hear unanimous consent.
Tabling of documents.